Hi, welcome to the Ithihasa channel. Today I talk to you about Bheeshma, an enigma which even today we cannot decipher to its ultimate end. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjanaya Namaha, Swami Sharanamayyappo, Om Guruve Namaha. So we spoke about how Amba stayed in the Hastinapur palace for 6 years. And through that time, there was not a single person in the whole kingdom who would talk a wrong thing about Amba. For Bhishma commanded loyalty, Bhishma commanded admiration, Bhishma commanded respect. And sometimes Bhishma commanded fear too. And hundreds of times that Amba stayed in the palace did she ask Bhishma to marry her. And hundreds of times Bhishma refused because of his oath. Even though he loved her and she was the one woman he ever loved, how he longed for her love, for the comfort of this woman's warmth. But because of his oath, he said no. And until one day, Amba got up and walked away into the nearby forest where, as destiny would have it, she met Parshurama the Bhargava, who then came and asked Bhishma to forget his oath so that Bhishma could then marry her. And Bhishma refused and went to battle with him. That battle was a ferocious battle that was fought between Bhishma and Parshurama. And it ended with Bhishma defeating his guru Parshurama. Bhishma returned back to Hastinapur to a hero's welcome. And the first thing he did was to go to the queen mother Satyavati, his mother, and recount the events to her. Bhishma always referred to Satyavati as mother, which was ironic because she was a couple of years younger to him. On that fateful day when he had gone to her father's fishing village, when he reached the fishing village, her divine fragrance hit him. He was a young lad of 20, and her beauty and her fragrance overpowered him. But he set all that aside and went directly to her father and spoke to her father for taking her to his father Shantanu. And there he took that terrible oath that he would never bear children, he would never marry, an oath of celibacy. A lot of later texts say that Bhishma castrated himself that day. But nowhere in the Mahabharata is it mentioned so. In fact, there are times when Bhishma was asked to cast away his oath and to sire children and get married and sire children. But Bhishma refused. For an oath is more terrible if you can and you will not, rather than if you just cannot. Bhishma was all testosterone. Of course, the enemies of Bhishma would always refer to this incident as Bhishma losing his manhood. But then these were people who couldn't beat Bhishma in a war or a battle and would just sit and gossip about him. And that day, when that wily fisherman handed over Satyavati to Bhishma and said, "Go take your mother and go to Shantanu," he made her stand in his chariot and took her back to his father. And from that day on, she was always mother to him. Nothing else. Vichitravirya, in the meantime, spent all his days frolicking, pampering his wives Ambika and Ambalika, writing poems for them, singing songs to them. In fact, people used to say that he was probably a Gandharva in his last birth for the way in which he would write poems and sing songs. And he spent all his days and nights with them, caring little about the administration of the Hastinapur kingdom, leaving everything in Bhishma's able hands and shoulders. And Bhishma took care of the Hastinapur kingdom with a smile. He had all the pains and troubles of running a kingdom without ever having the luxury of being king. He was a regent, a perpetual regent. And 1 year after Amba left, Vichitravirya suddenly died. It was almost as Amba had cursed him. Bhishma was devastated. He was heartbroken. So was Satyavati. Satyavati went into her room for 1 full month, locked herself in, missed a few meals here and there, hoping that she would die. But then she had been a queen for far too long, and she realized that her sorrow was not so much that her son Vichitravirya had died. It was more that the Hastinapur kingdom was left without an heir. And it was that realization that made her realize that she has to get back out. She called for a warm bath, crisp clothes, and finally one day she came out of her room and the divine fragrance filled the palace all over again. She called Bhishma to her side and made him sit down, took his large hand in hers and started to talk and speak to him. She told him that she rued the day that her father made him take that awful oath. For none of her sons ever ruled Hastinapur. Chitrangada was killed soon after he was crowned the king. And Vichitravirya never wanted to rule. He was happy letting Bhishma rule. And taking pity on Bhishma, she said, no good ever comes of putting someone else through misery. And Bhishma tenderly looked at her and said, no, mother, I am not miserable. I lead a rich and full life. Yes, the death of my brother savages me. It haunts me day and night. But this pain shall pass. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. The realization that comes to a man who knows he may never die. For this is a man who's been blessed by his father that he will die only at the time and manner of and place of his choosing. He knows he will outlast most of the people around him. He knows that there is no one in this entire Brahman who can defeat him in battle and who can kill him. It is this realization that makes a man a sannyasin. It is this realization that makes a man a yogin. Bhishma was a sannyasin ruler. He ruled without prejudice. He ruled without bias. The ideal ruler. All that mattered to Bhishma was Dharma. And it will be often said later in time that Bhishma was at fault for not having stood up. Bhishma was at fault for not having voiced his opinion, for he could have changed the course of the Kuru dynasty. He could have changed the course of the events to come, and he was wrong in not standing up. But Bhishma knew that the long march of destiny cannot be quelled. You can change the course a little. You can stem the flow a little. But you cannot quell the tide, the long march of destiny. There would be many a funeral pyre that would be lit in front of Bhishma. Many children would fall and get up and run again. Some would fall by the wayside, never to get up. And it's this realization that made Bhishma be at peace. For he knew that his dharma was always by him. But that peace didn't last very long. Satyavati continued talking. She looked at Bhishma and said, you know, this Kuru dynasty is left without an heir now. There is no one to continue this dynasty. You had once taken an oath to my father, an oath of celibacy that was made to him. But today the man to whom you gave the oath is no longer alive, and the circumstances are different. Vichitravirya's wives are young and beautiful. And then the Mahabharata describes in the words that can only be translated as, the field of Vichitravirya is young and fertile. It is time, O Bhishma, that you sow your seeds in this field of Vichitravirya. Harsh truths to be said in a very sweet way. And Bhishma closed his eyes. And the past thoughts started coming in his mind. He remembered how he played at his mother Ganga's lap in Devaloka. He remembered his teachers, Brihaspati, Vashishta, Chavana, and the great Bhargava Parashurama, under whose tutelage he learnt the various things that he knows today. He remembered his mother sending him to Shukracharya, the preceptor of the Asuras, to learn every aspect of running a kingdom there was. And he remembered her words, the words of Ganga, that my child, learn well, for you shall one day be the greatest king of the greatest dynasty of the land, the Kuru dynasty. I want you to learn well, for you will be the greatest king ever. And then the dark thought about that oath he took at the fisherman's village, it clouded his mind, and then the cloud cleared and a beautiful face appeared in front of him, that of Amba. And then his Bhargava, who came to tell him to marry her and to cast aside his oath. The one thing that Parshurama the Bhargava ever asked of him, and he refused. And for that oath, he fought his teacher, he fought his master, he fought his guru. His arrows pierced his guru's flesh and drew blood for that one oath. And as he closed his eyes, the one thing that came to his mind was disgust for the woman sitting next to him. For the first and only time in his life, Bhishma could not get himself to call Satyavati mother. And he thought, this fisherwoman? She made me take an oath in front of my father, an oath that changed my life, an oath that changed my dharma. And just as she likes, she expects me to forget this oath? And he opened his eyes and looked at her, a cold look, a look that brought terror in Satyavati's heart. And with a cold drawl, he said, you do not begin to understand the measure of the man I am. For how can you? For how can you? This was Bhishma's way of insulting Satyavati. This was Bhishma's way of telling Satyavati that she was a fisherwoman. She would never understand the lofty ideals a Kshatriya has to live by. She would never understand the words of a Kshatriya that can never be changed. For a Kshatriya has to be a role model to the public for the people that he governs. And Bhishma said, the earth may lose her fragrance, water may no longer be wet. The sun may lose its heat and lustre, Agni may lose its power. The moon may lose its calmness, and Akasha may lose its ability to make Shruti. Indra, who slayed Vritra, may lose his valor, and Dharma may lose his impartiality. I may be denied the Swarga that I deserve, but this Bhishma will never break this oath. Hear this now and hear this once and for all, and never forget it, for I shall never repeat it ever again. And so saying, Bhishma got up and walked away, leaving a shattered and insulted Satyavati, being made to know that her level and value of being queen meant nothing for her. Bhishma refused to meet Satyavati for many days after that. He studiously avoided her, and she also was too embarrassed to face him. And one day, when he was coming back from his contemplation at the side of his mother, the river Ganga, and he saw her, his eyes lit up, and he walked towards her, and she was surprised. And he accosted her and said, Mother, I have a plan and I have a thought. I want to tell you 2 stories, and I think we should think about what you had said. And Satyavati was excited. So she said, yes, let's discuss it. And Bhishma told 2 stories of his guru. 2 of his gurus. They're wonderful stories. And one is the story about the Bhargava Parshurama. The Mahabharata describes the story of Parshurama twice or thrice in the text. But this is Bhishma's version of Parshurama. And I shall tell this first. So Bhishma started telling the story of Parshurama. There was a great king Kartavirya Arjuna of the heir dynasty, long, long ago, the heir kingdom. And he was a virtuous man. He was blessed by the Lord Dattatreya to have 1,000 arms, each as strong and massive as the bolts of a palace gate. And he was invincible in war and unbeatable in war. But he was a righteous and generous man. He would give a lot of dakshinas to the brahmanas. He would give a lot of gifts to the brahmanas. He would conduct many yajnas and he would conduct a lot of functions where he would give out a lot of land and wealth to the people of his country. He was a respected king. He was a great king. But his sons were a little different. While Kartavira Arjuna had to strive really hard to achieve what he did, for his sons they were all given on a platter, easy, and so they didn't value what they had. And they were mean and uncouth and cruel children. One day they went to the ashram of Jamadagni, Parshurama's father, and Parshurama was out collecting firewood. They took a fancy to Jamadagni's cow and calf and they dragged her away and went off. Soon Parshurama came and saw his father in agony and screaming that the high princes have taken the calf and cow and walked away. And Parshurama, furious, went back to the palace, overpowered the sons of Kartavira Arjuna, and brought back the cow and the calf. The next day, seething in anger, those young, arrogant princes of the high kingdom, sons of Kartavira Arjuna, came back to Jamadagni's ashrama when Parshurama was not there again, and slayed his father, cut his neck off, and killed him in front of his wife. When Parshurama came back, he saw his mother sobbing bitterly at the body of his father. He couldn't bear the hurt and he swore that he would end the tyranny of the Kshatriyas once and for all. He went with his parashu, his axe, his sword and his bow, and went and challenged Kartavira Arjuna to battle. Kartavira Arjuna was initially quite clueless about what happened, but he was challenged to battle and he went. And Parshurama and Kartaviriya first rained arrows on each other. And finally Parshurama took his parashu or his axe and smashed off the hands and cut the hands of Kartaviriya Arjuna and then slayed him. His anger not abated, Parshurama went up and down the Bharat Varsha across the length and breadth of the land, killing Kshatriya after Kshatriya who came in front of him. And it is said that 21 times did he go across the length and breadth of Bharat Varsha, slaughtering 21 generations of Kshatriyas, till there came a point where the Kshatriya women would hide their children out of sight so that Parshurama would not kill them. But when the balance shifts, things go bad again. When the Kshatriyas were not there, petty common thieves would start harassing the Brahmanas, would start ravaging them and their wives, and there was lawlessness in the land because the Kshatriyas who maintained the Dharma and the law of the land were not there. And the great sage Kashyapa realized that this was too bad and Bharatvarsha was at the brink of another catastrophe. So he summoned Parshurama and admonished him and said that he has to stop this slaughter, and sent him down to the southern part of Bharatvarsha, where he told him to go and do penance to cool down and make up for all the killing that he had done. For a Brahmana is not supposed to take up arms and kill, but to do penance and sadhana. And Parshurama went down to the western part of southern Bharatvarsha. It is said in a story that Parshurama took his axe and drew the land of Kerala from the sea. But it's not exactly true, for in those days it was the ice ages and the sea had receded quite far out, bringing out a new piece of land into view, and it was there that Parshurama went to do his penance. What is today Kerala is a small part of that huge expanse of land which had been drawn out because of the recession of the sea during the Ice Age. The geography, of course, is very different now, but Kerala is still the land of Parshurama because of this. The point of the story being, we kind of deviated a little, but the point of the Bheeshma deviated a little. But the point of the story being that when Bharatvarsha was devoid of all Kshatriyas, the Kshatriya women who had not yet saved their children from the wrath of Parshurama had to resort to going to the Brahmanas to further the line of Kshatriyas. And it was done with a system called Niyogi, which was done completely devoid of lust. It was a duty performed by the Brahmanas where they would purify their mind to be devoid of lust, and they would go with the Kshatriya women and give children to them. And according to the Varna system that existed in those days, a child born of this union would belong to the husband of that woman, and hence that child would be a Kshatriya. And it was in this way that the Brahmanas of the time furthered the race of the Kshatriyas, and worthy Brahmanas well versed in the knowledge of the Vedas and also war and also the art of war. They were the ones who, with the Kshatriya women, furthered the race of the Kshatriyas, and this was one of the examples that Bheeshma gave. The other example was of the other story was a story of, which started with his Guru Brihaspati. So it's a story that I have read many times in the past, and every time I read it, a new nuance comes to view. It's a very exciting story. So this was a story about Brihaspati in Devaloka, and it was kind of gossip at the time when Bheeshma was studying in Devaloka. And if Bheeshma had not recounted this story down in Bhuloka to Satyavati, and it had not come, and if it had not come to the idea of Krishna Dvaipayana, it would be a case of what happens in Devaloka stays in Devaloka. So Brihaspati was the preceptor of Indra and the Devas, a very well-respected man. He had an elder brother called Uttatya, who had a wonderful, beautiful wife with beautiful eyes called Mamata. So Brihaspati one day came and approached Mamata and started importuning her to lie with him. And he was extremely persistent, and Mamata went on refusing, saying that she was the wife of his elder brother and it was not right that he do so. But Brihaspati persisted and started to force himself when Mamata said that she is already with child. And it's not right that he comes and lies with her at this point of time, because the child was an educated child and the child had learnt all the Vedas and its 6 Angas. Now we know the story of how Abhimanyu imbibed the knowledge of how to enter the Chakravyuh when Arjuna told this story to Subhadra when she was pregnant with Abhimanyu. And this is a very famous story. But the idea that a child in the womb of a mother can understand and accept the knowledge given by the father and the mother while in the womb existed way before this Abhimanyu story did. And through the Mahabharata and much before, even in the time of the Satya Yuga, that a child in the mother's womb can imbibe the knowledge from the father and the mother. And so when Brihaspati didn't heed to Mamata's requests and forced himself on her, the child within started screaming, "What are you doing? Stop! I'm already here and there's no place for 2 of us." And Brihaspati, when he heard the child scream, felt insulted. And the effect of the encounter was not as good as he was expecting. And in his anger, he cursed that child, that innocent little child. He cursed the child that the child will be born in darkness. And that child was born blind and called Dharma, enveloping darkness. And in Bheeshma's recounting of the story, you can see the anger and disgust that Bheeshma had for his Guru Brihaspati. He may have been his Guru, but there was definite disgust, for Bheeshma was a man of Dharma who would not waver an inch from his Dharma. And that disgust he had for Brihaspati was quite obvious in his recounting of this story. Anyway, Dharma, once he was born, was an extremely intelligent person. He learnt under various gurus and teachers and understood all the aspects of the Vedas and the tantric form of practice. Dharma was an ardent tantric practitioner, practicing tantra in its purest form. But in the process of doing so, most of the Vedic scholars of the time were angry with Dharma's way of practicing the tantric form of education and started cursing him and started antagonizing him. Dharma had married a beautiful woman, a Brahmin woman called Pradveshi, with whom he had many children, the eldest being Gautama. These sages who had a problem with Dirgatama's practicing the tantric way of life went to his wife Pradvesi and started poisoning her mind against Dirgatamas. Now, Dirgatamas was a great rishi. In fact, 150 hymns in the Rig Veda were written by Dirgatamas. One of them was quite interesting. So it's a hymn written for the doctors of the time. It goes like this. May the turning of the days not tire me. May the fire not burn me. May I not bite the earth. May the waters not swallow me. So this term bite the earth was the first reference for bite the dust. Another one bites the dust. And this was by Dirgatamas thousands and thousands of years ago. Eventually, Dirgatamas would become the Rajguru or the preceptor of King Bharata, from whom Bharatvarsha gets its name. So the great Dirgatamas lived a very long and full life. And then one day, Pradvesi had a showdown with Dirgatamas where she started criticizing Dirgatamas and saying, "You are not a proper husband, for a proper husband should be a pati, a protector, and a bhartri, a provider, and you are neither of them. So I do not think you're a worthy husband." And Dirgatamas said, "If it's luxuries that you want, if it's money that you want, if it's material wealth that you want, take me to any kshatriya and I will ensure that they will give you whatever you want." But by then, Pradvesi was not having any of it, and she called her children, Gautama, the eldest, being an evil and covetous man as described by Bheeshma, and told him, "Let us tie this man and send him down the Ganga." And Gautama and his other brothers tied their father to a raft and sent him floating down the Ganga. So this evil Gautama, he eventually realized the mistake he made, performed hundreds of years of penance to undo this sin that he had committed, then went to the Adiyogi. The Lord Shiva himself sat at his feet for another few hundred years and did tapasya there, learning from the great Adiyogi all the knowledge of the cosmos. And finally, he became the great Saptarishi, Maharishi Gautama, the same Gautama who married Ahilya, the same Gautama. And so it is possible that through years and years of tapasya and sadhana, you can probably atone for a sin that you would have committed. And Gautama over time had many children, and one of his descendants was Shvetaketu, the son of Uddalaka. And if you remember, we had told a story once where Pandu mentions Shvetaketu and how Shvetaketu was the one who cursed all women that they should be married to one man. They should not have the freedom to go with whichever man they wish to go with. And that was the curse he gave all women. So Dirgatamas floated down the Ganga until he came to a kingdom where the king Bali was performing his morning prayers at the Ganga. This is not the Mahabali we spoke about. This is King Bali in some eastern part of Bharatvarsha. When King Bali saw Dirgatamas floating down the river, he drew him down to the banks. And when he realized that Dirgatamas was a great sage, he invited Dirgatamas to his kingdom, built a beautiful house at the banks of the Ganga and allowed Dirgatamas to stay there. And then he went to Dirgatamas and said that I am childless, I'm not able to bear a child. I would like you to bless my wife to have a child so that we can take this race forward, this dynasty forward. And he went to his wife Sudeshna and told her that this is this great sage Dirgatamas. He's blind and old, but I would like you to go and meet him and he will bless you with children, and we need children to take this dynasty forward. But Sudeshna was not very keen on going and meeting a blind sage who was old. So she sent her maidservant to meet him. Now the Mahabharata describes this maidservant as a Shudra woman. The Varna system existent in those days was very different from the caste system that exists today. The Varna system in those days was more of a method of streamlining talent and abilities so that you could take up various forms of duties. And a Shudra was not really looked down upon in those days. It is just a duty that you had to perform. For when this Shudra woman came to Dirghatamas had 11 children with this Shudra woman, the eldest being Kakshivat. Kakshivat was an extremely great Brahmin sage of the highest level. In fact, if you remember the story of Pandu, which Pandu told Kunti much later, there was a story of this great king Vyushitasva and his beautiful wife Bhadra, and how Vyushitasva was able to have children after his death. This Bhadra was the daughter of Kakshivat. So you have a great rishi, Dirghatamas, who had a child from a Shudra woman, Kakshivat, who later became an excellent sage himself, who had a daughter who then married a Kshatriya and then had children with him. So the Varna system of those days was very different from the caste system we see today. And it is possible for great sages to have children with Shudra women and who will still become great sages themselves. And so when King Bali came back to Dirghatamas and asked him, "Are these 11 children mine?" Dirghatamas said, "No, they belong to the Shudra woman who your wife sent over." And then Bali went back to Sudeshna and reprimanded her and asked her to go back to Dirghatamas. And this time Sudeshna went. For she realized that the children Dirghatamas had were definitely remarkable children. And I think time was running out for Sudeshna. So then Sudeshna had 5 children with Dirghatamas. And they became kings in their own right. King Bali divided his kingdom into 5 parts. And each of those 5 children became kings of each of those 5 parts. Those 5 parts being Anga, Vanga, Kalinga, Pundra and Sumha. Anga was the kingdom of Karna much later. And Kalinga was a great kingdom of the time in those days. And so Bheeshma said, "It is possible for us to invite a Brahmana to come and further the race of the Kuru dynasty. And if you give your permission, dear mother, I shall find one such great rishi who will be worthy enough to sow the seed in the fertile field of Vichitravirya and further the Kuru dynasty." And so, saying with these 2 examples, Bheeshma told Satyavati that it was possible to further the line of the Kuru dynasty with the great Brahmana, hence taking himself off the playing field. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Swami Sharanamayyappo, Om Guruve Namaha.